Good evening, good afternoon, everyone. On behalf of the Atlantic Council and the team at the South Asia Center, thank you all for joining us for this very important discussion on overseas voting in Pakistan. I am personally really excited about this conversation because it is a topic close to my heart. Many of you may know I grew up in Pakistan and moved here in 2007. And the work here, but even before that, keeps me closely looped into what's going on in the country. And it is important for many young people like me and others who live abroad to participate in and get involved in Pakistan's democracy. But this topic, like many other topics in Pakistan today, has become victim to polarization, which means that there's a lot of misinformation, disinformation, confusion about what this means, how do you implement it, which is why today's conversation is going to be highly informative, not just for the audience here, but for many of those who may watch this discussion online later. I'm an optimist at heart and believe that Pakistan's democracy, flawed and floundering as it may be, is stronger today than it was 15 years ago when the democratic transition, the latest democratic transition began. Including overseas Pakistanis into the democratic process, in my view, can further enrich and energize the country's democracy. And patriotic citizens abroad, especially those who thrive in secular and liberal democracies, can help accelerate the democratic transition in Pakistan. But we also must recognize that people like us, many of us seated here in this room in the West, should take note of our own privilege. And that privilege is that this debate and conversation about overseas Pakistanis by and large ignores the millions of Pakistanis who thrive and work and toil away in Gulf states where they don't have dual citizenship, where they don't have permanent residency, and from which they eventually have to go back to their home country. I'll just give you a fact here that about 10 to 15% of a household's income in Khyber Pakhtunkhwa comes from foreign remittances, and the majority of people who send foreign remittances in that province work in places like Kuwait, work in places like Saudi Arabia. And so enfranchising them is perhaps the most important thing that we should care about because they eventually have to go back to the country from which they hail. So that's something I hope that folks today will chat about and dive a bit deeper into. And I also think and hope that the conversation will talk about the complexities on this topic. What constituency do you hail from? How do you vote? What are the processes of disputing the election or your results at the end of the day? And how does technology play a role? So to explore this debate, today we're honored to be joined by Shuja Nawaz. He's South Asia Center's founding director and distinguished fellow. He will be moderating today's discussion. And before I give the floor to Shuja and the fellow panelists, whom I'll introduce in just a bit, I'll also invite and thank our partner for this event, the Muslim American Leadership Alliance, MALA. MALA is a civic and community organization committed to promoting individual freedom and diversity and to celebrating Muslim American heritage. Many of you know Shuja Saab. He doesn't need an introduction. As I said, he's a distinguished fellow at the South Asia Center, and he was the first director. He's a political and strategic analyst and author of two highly important and must-read books. Joining Shuja today is Dawood Ghaznavi. He's a barrister at the Supreme Court of Pakistan, received his higher education from UK's Uxbridge College and the University of Oxford Brookes. He moved to Pakistan in 2011 and became the youngest Pakistani attorney to reach the Pakistani Supreme Court. And Dawood has been fighting the cause for overseas Pakistanis in the Supreme Court of Pakistan to this day, and I believe there's an appeal filed in the Supreme Court as well. Joining Dawood is Rifat Chughtai. She's a senior advisor to the South Asia Center and has been working for women and children's causes for a long, long time. She's involved in a whole host of issues and is also the founder of the U.S.-Pakistan Women's Council, which is a public-private partnership program started by the U.S. Department of State. And last but not least is my dear friend Sahar Khan. She's a research fellow at the Cato Institute. At the Cato Institute's Defense and Foreign Policy Department. She researches state-sponsored militancy and terrorism and holds a PhD in political science from the University of California, Irvine. She's also editor at Instinct magazine. With that, I would like to invite the founder and chairwoman of MALA, Zainab Zeib Khan. She has a master's degree in clinical psychology and currently works in private practice in North Carolina and has also served as a United Nations delegate on the Commission of the Status of Women since 2013. with that, over to you. Thank you.
Good evening, everyone, and thank you so much for joining us. I'll keep my remarks very, very brief. My name is Zainab Khan, and I am the co-founder of MALA, the Muslim American Leadership Alliance. It's a nonprofit which we started in 2015 through a very grassroots movement focused on celebrating Muslim American heritage, which is not political and not theological and very, very difficult. So we've continued to do so. And the reason we are sponsoring and supporting this evening's program is because seeing how this issue affects Pakistani American diaspora groups is extremely important. And that's what MALA focuses on, is how the Muslim American diaspora groups are affected politically, socially, economically, and really we provide a platform for people of all different backgrounds to join us. So this is a very unique event for us as well. You can check out our website. It's malanational.org. We are the first organization to archive and collect stories from the Muslim American community, and they are actually housed right here in Washington, D.C. in the Library of Congress and with the American Folklife Center. We've done incredible programs with corporate partners such as Facebook, and mostly recently we will be partnering with Cartier for their groundbreaking exhibition that focuses on Islamic art and heritage and how the company was started. And the reason why we do such unique programs is really to show the American public and the American citizens that Muslim Americans are very much a part of the American fabric of society. And the Pakistani American community has been one of the most influential and one of the most oldest groups here that have immigrated in the U.S. I myself am half Pakistani. My mother was from Pakistan. Her family immigrated here in the United States back in the 1960s. So I grew up seeing my mother without a community. And it's so important that we look around this room today and that we see that there is a sense of cohesion and that there is a place where we can belong, regardless of what our background or what our political beliefs may be or what our religious beliefs may be. Something holds us together. So in that case, again, I am very honored to have everybody along in this room, and I want to thank our board member Maha Khan for all her incredible hard work in putting this event together, and of course the Atlantic Council for bringing this program to the public. So thank you.
Thank you, Zainab, and thank you, Zaid. I'm Shuja Nawaz, and it's always a pleasure to be back at my old hunting grounds at the Atlantic Council. I remember when we started the South Asia Center on the other side of the street and then moved to this side of the street and in these much more modern and more appropriate surroundings for the growth of the Atlantic Council as a whole and for the South Asia Center, and now under Uzair, a new generation of leadership for the Pakistan initiative. So always glad to be here. I'm delighted that there was this partnership that brought this topic to the Atlantic Council and through the Council, hopefully to the world and particularly to people in Pakistan that matter. I think that is really part of our role to help translate complex ideas and make them intelligible to people here as well as in our other homeland. I'm a Pakistani American, and my priors in this are that there should be representation, but at both levels. And so although we're going to be talking about voting in Pakistan, I hope at some point I can interject my own hobby horse, which is that we as responsible American citizens have to also make sure that we vote in this country and that we are active in this country and we fulfill the oath that we took when we became citizens of this country, and make it a better country as a result. We owe it to both our homelands to do that. I'm not going to waste any more time with my comments. I'd like to ask Dawood Ghaznavi to present the case. He's a lawyer, and he has already filed a petition before the Pakistan Supreme Court. So, Dawood, why don't you share your priors with us?
Yes, thank you very much.
Tell us what should be done and why it should be done.
Yeah, first I really thank you to Atlantic Council, and especially Zainab and Mala and Maha and everyone. You people came today on a working day, and I'm extremely happy. Secondly, this issue is really close to me from the last 8 years. And the reason for that is because I myself was an overseas Pakistani once when I was studying in England. Then after that, when I moved back to Pakistan, I contested one election in Pakistan, and I saw how overseas Pakistani were pressurizing their own families in Pakistan to vote certain parties so that they can engage themselves in the voting process. So since then, I was really closely watching this aspect, that how to connect overseas Pakistanis with Pakistan. And when I got into this issue, I met some higher officials in Pakistan, and it was been like a kind of infamy even to talk to those people about this issue, because they were happy that they're sending money back home, but they were not happy that they should be connected with Pakistan. But when I wrote my first book about overseas voting, it was about thinking ahead. In that, I read about that how much democracy has been extended, how the facets and the epic of democracy has allowed people who are living outside the territorial boundaries of their country, they can still connect to their country. It's like a new concept of transnationalism. So I love the idea, and I read that 93 countries around the globe, they are practicing this exercise, and 21 African countries, they are doing it. So I started my journey from the courts to do this, because common law country like Pakistan, we can exercise our constitutional interpretation in the court. So I went to the court and went to the Supreme Court. Secondly, when I was working on prisoner detained abroad case, I came across Afia Siddiqui's case. When I read in the depth that how this mindset comes in the society and how Pakistan society has been radicalized, and I saw that transition of power in the Muslim world has never been smooth. If we can see, very few time in the history. So Pakistani diaspora is one of the largest diaspora, politically and emotionally charged, because we don't leave Pakistan just because we have to have a chateau in Cannes in Paris. We go out of the country because of economical reasons, safety, and then nepotism, discrimination, all those factors which pull us out of the country. And when we go abroad, especially in European countries, America, we see different system. And then we become monetarily comfortable, and then we think about what we can do for Pakistan, because they want to change things in Pakistan. This is how they become very vulnerable. And I have seen many international terrorist organizations, we became victimized of them just because we want change back home in Pakistan. And this is what I have closely watched when I was a student in England, how educated people, they wanted to change things in Pakistan, but they found that the corrupt regimes back home, they cannot do anything. So they become part of those, they become victim of those organizations. So I feel like that this collective energy has to be channelized. We have to give them a way to have their say in Pakistan. What kind of system we need to introduce? I mean, these people in this technological world are completely connected with Pakistan. On the FaceTime, you can watch your roads every day, what is happening. You cannot disconnect these people. So we have to give them an avenue to have their voice. Money only sending back is not, fulfilling the purpose. So I feel like that this is the only way, which is legal, which the West actually promote democracy. So I feel like why not find out a way within that process? So that's why I support this cause. We don't need to have 100% of voting in the start. Let's start from 5%. Increase it with the time, but give them the avenue of their catharsis and give them the avenue so that they can feel that they're part of the society. This is how I see the case.
Thank you. I think you've laid out the case. Let me ask Sahar if she can present her thoughts on where we should be headed and why.
Yes, well, thank you very much for inviting me. It's such a pleasure always to be at the Atlantic Council. So I was basically tasked with talking about the American diaspora and how the Pakistani diaspora can improve U.S.-Pakistan relations. So sort of at an upper level, or in a way, how can the diaspora engage in sort of these state relations? Now, I think all of us we're all part of the Pakistani diaspora here, but I wanted to lay out some statistics. How many of us are here? Now, according to the U.S. Census, there are between 500,000 and 1 million Pakistanis, which is a pretty sizable amount considering the size of Pakistan and other diaspora communities that exist. Within large diaspora communities, about 64% of Pakistanis have been living in the United States for over 10 years, which indicates to me that they've established roots here through various connections, and they have built family networks here, et cetera. They're engaged not only in local communities, but they're thinking about foreign policy as well, and they're thinking about how to engage the Pakistani government and the US government. And almost all of them, or not all of them, but about 55% of Pakistanis speak English. So when they arrive to the United States, they already have a leg up on many other diaspora communities which necessarily do not speak English very well, right? So that puts us at a very interesting advantage economically and politically as well. Now, what does this mean for sort of US-Pakistan relations? I think there are 4 elements that kind of bring us to this aspect, right? Now, when I think about state-to-state relations, there's sort of the higher level, right? You have the president and the prime minister chit-chatting. Did Biden call? Did Biden not call? We talk about that. Then you have sort of track 2 changes, the diplomats discussing, everything like that. But what about the average person, the average Pakistani? How can they change or bring change to Pakistan? And this is a point that you mentioned as well. How do you engage sort of the regular person back home? And the things that Pakistanis are generally concerned about are entrepreneurship, right? As most of you know, Pakistan is experiencing a youth bulge, which about 65% of the population is between the ages of 19 and 34. That's a massive amount, especially for those of you who study demography. And the concern is, how do you start entrepreneurship, right? Now, because of 9/11, there was this mindset that Pakistani communities or Muslim American communities have to do more. But what does that mean, do more, right? So a lot of the confidence building measures began with business to business relations. How do you get involved in strategic technologies like telecommunications and internet development? How do you get the business there, right? And that has all the discussions of taxes and whatnot, which Uzair is probably at better position to talk about. The second aspect, of course, is education. Now, Pakistan is one of the largest recipients of Fulbright scholarships, which is huge. A Fulbright is basically where Pakistani citizens come to the United States at universities for a couple of years. They study here for graduate programs, and then they're supposed to go back to Pakistan. And one of the beauties of the Fulbright program is that you build a cultural relationship between the 2 communities. Now, Pakistanis, I also grew up in Pakistan. I'm from Karachi, so if there are any Karachiites out here, high five to all of you. But I grew up in Karachi, and I grew up watching Hollywood movies. And I wanted to study here in the US in college, and I wanted the American experience. But the Hollywood experience is not really what the experience, like real life here is. So that's one of the goals of the Fulbright program and many others. A lot of universities, and another sort of link to 9/11 has been that a lot of universities have focused on terrorism studies, there's been some bad things to that too, but some of the good things about that, it has pushed universities to create regional centers. So you actually see a lot of South Asia programs, a lot of courses on Pakistan erupting in big state colleges. Which is kind of a big deal because those kind of courses weren't offered before. So that's one way the diaspora community can also be involved, taking these courses, learning more, not just about because your mother wants you to know about more Pakistanis, but because you want to learn about the country in a more educational way. Another aspect, of course, has been tourism. How do you develop tourism? How do you get people, and especially Pakistanis, not simply Pakistani Americans, but Americans to travel back to Pakistan? And this has been, of course, a concern because of safety. And sort of the 4th issue is what we're talking about today, which is voting. Right? How do you get the Pakistani diaspora involved? It's very hard to get people to vote, right? I don't know how many of you vote in national elections. Local elections is even worse. Everybody complains about politics, nobody wants to vote, and you see that in American politics. And now you're getting this push to sort of engage voting-wise in Pakistan as well. All of this is a big way of saying that one of the ways that the diaspora can at least engage foreign policy, impact foreign policy, is build confidence-building measures. Through various avenues, having people-to-people connections, you can have a better idea of why is it that things don't seem to work at the upper level, right? And why is it that more and more Pakistanis are not being engaged, or why is there such an importance to have a hyphenated identity? I'm happy to, of course, answer questions about that.
Thank you. We'll come back to you, and we want to also get your take on where this question should be answered.
Yeah. You see, I avoided the question.
Rifat.
Yeah, I think I'll go back to the question itself, because that has been my focus. And though, thank you for educating us about what's happening in Pakistan. It's very heartening to hear that you're fighting the fight to give us that representation. To answer this question, should overseas Pakistanis be allowed to vote in Pakistan? I mean, in my mind, there's not a straight black and white answer to that. The diaspora, as far as I know, and I do interact with different networks, does want that right to vote, because I'm just going to quote somebody who told me that whenever they need money for any projects or anything, they come to us, and they don't give us the right, even to simple things as opening a bank account in Pakistan, which is changing now. Things are changing. So I think what has been happening about giving Pakistanis the voting right, that has been approved, but they're asking the Pakistani diaspora to come to Pakistan and vote. Am I right? So it is next to impossible for people just to jump on a plane and go to Pakistan just to vote. So I think ex-Prime Minister Imran Khan came up with the idea that there should be electronic voting, which is a very good idea. But I think with that, even in US, we are struggling a little bit, because technology, even though it facilitates a lot of things, it makes the process much easier and creates accountability. But still, there are glitches in it, which we as Americans in the United States also complain about. So I think we need to do a little bit more due diligence to make sure that technology that we are using is accurate, and otherwise there's going to be chaos after the elections. Whoever loses the elections is going to go straight to the Supreme Court and file a complaint over there that there was, people didn't vote properly, or the machines were hacked, as you heard over here also. The machines were manipulated in some way. So having said that, I feel this is a giant with 4 heads. The first head is what does the diaspora want? The diaspora wants to have the right to vote. Majority of the people do. The second is this going to be economically good for Pakistan? We have to consider that as well. And then the third is the biggest one, which is politically, who benefits more from this? And as Sarah had mentioned about, and Daud had also mentioned about, different types of diasporas that we have in different countries. There's approximately 8.8 million expats from Pakistan, and out of that, 4.4 are in the Middle East. And having said that, not to categorize any group of people in one category, but majority of the people who work in the Middle East are blue-collar workers. So I don't know, we were talking about it a little while ago. Would they be interested in even voting? Do they know their rights, that they should, the strength of their vote? I doubt that. But and most of those people in the Middle East are supporters of the Pakistan Muslim League Nawaz Sharif group. And the other part, the rest of the voters, 4.2 million voters, are either residing in the United States or in Europe, and majority of them are white-collar workers. And they know their rights, and they want to assert their rights and have a say. But fortunately or unfortunately, they're all Imran PTI supporters. So this is what politicized this whole issue of voting rights and what is the best method to have people vote in Pakistan. This is very interesting to me. But the fourth aspect of that is the legality of the issues, voting issue. I'm not just talking about the legal issues in Pakistan, I'm also talking about in the United States. We have certain laws, FARA law, for example, that prohibit us from doing things. So I'm assuming that when you think it's your right to vote and you're supporting a party in Pakistan, you also feel obligated to raise funds for them. And as you see what's happening in Pakistan right now, we have to be very careful. I did caution a lot of my friends that don't send money randomly to campaigns in Pakistan because you will be flagged and you will create problems for that campaign itself, which is the case right now is testimonial to that. But I think we need to do due diligence as far as the laws are also concerned in Pakistan as well as in the United States.
Thank you, Rifat. I'm going to come back to Dawood because you're the lawyer amongst us and you know the law on this. Give us a very brief rundown of the changes that took place in the law regarding overseas voting.
Okay.
Under the PTI, there was a change made, and then the PMLN comes in and reverts back to an earlier. So could you just quickly give us
Yes.
that, as well as the issue that Rifat raised about FARA, the Foreign Agents Registration Act.
Yes.
To what extent is that a hindrance to being active in a political campaign overseas? I ask this because we hear constantly in the newspapers in the US that you have American advisors and consultants who are hired by foreign governments to run their campaigns in other countries. So you have, people going abroad and becoming advisors to Bolsonaro or somebody else, and that seems to be legal. So can you give us a quick
Yes.
rundown?
When I was contesting this case, the biggest issue was within the government circles or even in the election commission was that what type of mechanism you will devise for this system. So when Supreme Court actually picked up this matter in 2018, they actually asked NADRA, which is one of the private, one of the government, but it is working independently, and election commission to come up and devise a sort of mechanism that how this 9 million overseas voters can be facilitated. So when they came in the court and they gave a mechanism which called iVoting, it was pretty much advanced sort of mechanism through which you can vote through different apps on the phone or on your laptop, this kind of stuff. So Supreme Court actually asked them that how long it can take you to devise a mechanism. So they took like 12 weeks to devise a mechanism. So after 12 weeks, they came up with a mechanism. They had like a pilot testing, and then they wanted to have a third-party assessment. So they hired one security company from Dubai. This was all was done by Supreme Court. So this third-party assessment company, they made their report, and they've said that there are certain recommendations which need to be taken, but because the election were on the head, so they asked that you can try these, this process in your by-elections. So in 2018 October, in by-election, we tested those mechanisms. There were two pilot projects under which it was being done. Minor recommendations were being asked to do even further, but overall, it was a great initiative. I mean, like, it was first ever in the whole world community that a digital form of electronic voting was introduced. So my point was that at some point you need to start, even you start at 3% of population, but the idea should not die. But on the name of mechanism not to have, the idea is still abandoned. So this is my major concern, that it can start from 2%, but at least it should be.
But the new government
Yes.
brought a new law
No, what
which
happened?
cancelled the PTI.
Yes, what happened was that in 2017, while I was contesting this case, the current government knew at the time, they were in power, they knew at the time that Supreme Court is going to ask them, what have you done on overseas voting? So what they did, they did came up with one law which actually not really allow legal duty bound to Election Commission to devise a mechanism, but it was just been said, oh, could you please do some pilot projects? And then that's fine. So what Supreme Court actually did, they interpret that law and make it to the point where this can be implemented. So when PTI came in power, they implemented the Supreme Court judgment, and in 2021 December, they passed a law. When they passed a law, they made Election Commission legal duty bound, because Election Commission is a separate legal identity. So what happened that in March, when the new government came, the first thing they did was they repealed the law. In just one single day, no debate in the parliament, no discussion in the parliament, they just repealed the law. And they brought it back to 2017 position. So now I'm asking to the Supreme Court that how you have interpreted the same law and you have given us the direction, and they have gone back to the 2017.
Then how do we explain the actual pilots? Because they had about 700,000 people who were in the pilot that was tested for voting by overseas Pakistanis, and only 1.2% of them actually voted. So isn't that going to be a high mountain to climb?
There were like 45 constituencies where the pilot projects were being done.
Yes.
It was a by-election. The turnout was very low. And the biggest, I found, dishonesty by Election Commission was that they didn't teach people how to vote. Electronic voting need a serious sort of discussion, a serious sort of guidance. So what intentionally they did, you've been telling me a day before that this is the process and this is how you need to do. You have to download an app. You need to understand the app. So this is how they delayed the process. And finally, they just gave the recommendation, which they gave in the Supreme Court. They said it's fine. But in their recommendation, they said there's problems with this system.
And is it correct that most of the pilot voters were in the Gulf states and the Middle East?
The turnout was very low.
Yes.
The turnout was really low. The biggest issue they found was the secrecy of the vote. But this is really interesting. If you see American postal ballot, on which in 2020, your general election, your presidential election, 75% people, they vote through ballot, absentee ballot. And in absentee ballot, you just need to sign in front of even your sister, your daughter, your brother. You just sign it and send it back. So our election commission has been saying that there is no secrecy in this process. So we are constantly not fighting for the system, but we are fighting for, like she addressed, because my point for this case is not party-based. I don't believe that which party is going to take credit out of this. My thought is completely go to Lincoln's school of thought, that let's see the generations, they see the fruits of it. So I feel like that even you start from 2%, it must be started. This is how I see the process. Mechanisms, in Africa is a developing country, but if they can devise it,
Yes.
so why not, why not we? We shouldn't be.
Maybe we should be looking at countries similar to Pakistan, like the Philippines, that has a similar distribution of population and have set up systems through consulates and embassies. But let me come back to both Rifat and Sahar. And I want to come back to Sahar first to see where you come out on this in terms of what is the current generation and then the next generation of Pakistani Americans going to do about this?
Yeah, no, that's.
Do you see a difference, in an intergenerational difference?
I do see a difference, just within my family and network, but also just in general. I think there've been a couple of polls that are being worked at right now of how Pakistanis feel about voting. I think the main issue with voting, I think in essence, everybody wants to vote, everybody wants to be engaged, but as Dawood even mentioned, even in those pilot projects, voter turnout was low. And I think this is one of the biggest problems. How do you actually get voters to vote, get them to physically vote, even if it is downloading an app, various kinds of apps, following instructions and casting their vote. And this has become a problem where a lot of the younger generation, and I know the Pew Research Center had done a poll on just American youth, it's not Pakistani, but just American youth in general. I think Gen Z, like how much they vote and how do they want to vote. And turns out that the younger generation talks a lot about voting, but they actually vote a lot less than older generations. And it's the older generation who will actually make the effort to go and physically vote. And that's sort of been one of the phenomena in Florida and in other local elections. Like, why is change so difficult to do? It's because you get the gray vote, right? Which is the retired people who are able to go in the middle of the day and vote. Younger people are less likely to do that. So I think the problem with Pakistani overseas voting, some of it is just actual technical issues, right? But the second, I think, aspect is, do Pakistanis, they talk about voting, but I'm not very clear about why they want to vote in Pakistan and what kind of change they want to bring in Pakistan. And that is, I guess it's issue area focused, but that's been my concern. Like, I would like to vote in Pakistan, but I'm not entirely sure, because I don't live there anymore, what issues are really salient to vote on. And I'm not entirely clear whether or not me as an overseas Pakistani deserves to have the same level of vote as those who are living there and who have to deal with the domestic repercussions.
Let me move to Rifat, because this is a good segue. Is this a failure on the part of Pakistani political parties to not explain enough about what needs to be done by the expatriates? That's number one. Number two, I think you're going to be challenged by a lot of people in our audience, as well as people who watch this recorded program later, about two statements that you made. You said that one particular party is very popular in one country and another political party is very popular in a different country. On what basis do you make that claim?
Yeah, this is actually, thank you for pointing that out. I'm scared. But I think it is pretty much well known as a fact that even in this country, who are the people who actually go out and vote? It is the white-collar workers, people who have a stake, government employees, people who think that, okay, my vote will make a difference, who understand the power of voting. People who are struggling every day and are from paycheck to paycheck are more concerned about those issues. And to them, it doesn't seem that my vote is going to make any difference. So they keep struggling and they try to get to meet their needs pretty much, and not worry about the global or the national or the international changes in the world. Their focus is a little bit different. But I think, having said that, I also said there are two different types of parties over here who pique the interest of different groups. As people have said that Imran Khan, the people who live in the urban areas and are educated, they gravitate towards him, whereas people living in villages who are not that aware of their voting rights, actually I would say they're not aware of any of their rights, are people who will not be that enthused to vote for him, because it doesn't make a difference. The people who are educated, there's another aspect that I want to touch a little bit on, which is the aspect of corruption. Now, I know for a fact that I was in Pakistan. I came back about only a month ago, and I did kind of a survey that how people were feeling about this change, and majority of the people said that, oh, Imran Khan is our hope. And I was very pleasantly surprised to see that people were optimistic this time. They were not pessimistic about the situation in their country. They were optimistic because they felt that something new is going to come, and finally we have a say in what needs to happen in Pakistan. I've written a paper on it. It blew me away. And I became the devil's advocate, and I said, you guys have too many expectations from Imran Khan. Do you think he'll be able to deliver everything? Majority of them said yes, categorically yes. Some of them said, well, at least he's not corrupt. He's not going to consume the country's money or treasury or whatever.
Thank you, Rifat. I think you've won half the audience with your current comment.
I'm so glad. Thanks.
Just a little footnote from history, and I'm giving away my age. I covered the 1970 elections in Pakistan for PTV, and I used to travel in the countryside, in the villages also. And I remember raising the exact same questions that you were raising at that time about a man named Zulfikar Ali Bhutto. And the tenants in the Jhelum district, where I come from, were supposed not to know anything about politics. And yet they knew who they were going to vote for. And they told me why. And it was Roti Kapda or Makan.
Yes.
And I think it's at our own peril that we underestimate the ability of the common man and the hardworking laborer to make the right decisions. I think we've talked a lot amongst ourselves. It's time to bring the audience in. We've got a lot of very interesting people, but I do want to take a moment just to recognize a man that I look up to, very proud of. Mr. Khizr Khan is here.
Yes.
And he's made all of us very proud with the work that he's doing, and in memory of his son. I wondered if I could invite him to say a few words or ask a question. Well, please wait for the microphone. Here it is.
Thank you. First, Atlantic Council, I'm glad that they are holding this this conversation, this very important and timely conversation. And thank you to you for being the champion of our cherished First Amendment free press. Free press is the voice of democracy. Always remember this. And if somebody back home is hearing, without free press, democracy does not survive. So free press is absolutely necessary. Mr. Barrister, thank you. Thank you for leading the charge. I will tell you two short stories about the history of democracy in United States that will come handy when you appear before the Supreme Court to argue your case. 19th Amendment of US Constitution is called women's suffrage. In United States, women always never had the right to vote. They had to struggle up until 1919 and 1920, when the 19th Amendment was adopted. And only people reading it on the surface know that women were given the right to vote, but that was not the case. Mm-hmm. Only the majority women, the white women, were given the right to vote. Minority women could not vote up until the Civil Rights Act was passed. It's only then. And the reason I'm narrating this, and my utmost respect to Rifat, when you were mentioning about a certain class of citizens being qualified to realize the importance of the political activity. Same conversation was prevalent in United States in 1901. Had we come then, none of us would have gotten the right to vote even after we became citizen. We had to have, this is in 1901 through 1930s, we had to have a literacy test as non-whites to qualify to vote. After literacy test, we had to have 3 white citizens vouch for us that we are fully aware of our rights so we could vote. That is the history of American democracy, meaning that American democracy wasn't where it is today. So this is struggle that, Mr. Barrister, you have launched. It is commendable. It is not only commendable because for Pakistan or for Pakistani diaspora, but this struggle is commendable because today democracy faces challenge. Either we will have an open society, a democratic society, or we will have a closed society. It is our choice. In open society, all citizens have equal right. We don't have class of citizens. We don't have apartheid among the voting population. And this group that sits here, this is the 2020 Census Bureau's, as Sar mentioned, declaration that this group that sits here, Pakistani American diaspora, is the most influential group in the United States, economically and politically. I have traveled throughout the country for the last 5 years. I have seen their work. Every campaign in United States wants their participation. Every campaign, they're the winning difference in campaigns. And the reason for that is that they have been engaged. And the reason I mention this is that sometimes lack of participation in certain groups in Pakistan or in Pakistanis overseas is lack of engagement. Our current political parties are engaging them. So I commend you for your absolutely historical work. You will look back as Americans look back and are embarrassed about the lateness of 19th Amendment and the right to vote for women. Same thing, African American getting the right to vote. They look back, the treatment that they were inflicted with embarrassment. But we moved forward. This is 2022. Every citizen in Pakistan, in United States, has access to mass media, to social media. They are fully aware of the issues. They are fully engaged, directly or indirectly. So this excuse that they are not engaged, that they are not educated, that they are not fully aware of the issues, no, they are. Things have changed, and things are continuing to change. So I commend you for that effort. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Khizr Khan. Any other? I have a question over there. And then we'll come back to you.
Assalamu alaikum. I'm Mazhar Choktai here. Thank you so much, Atlantic Council and Mala, for hosting this event. Of course, as a Pakistani American diaspora, it is very close to our heart. Thank you so much, Dawood Bhai, for taking the leadership as a young barrister in Pakistan. I have a very simple equation here that this generation of Pakistani diaspora, that is all of us sitting here, we are very much connected with Pakistan. And we do send a tremendous amount of remittance to Pakistan because we have some interest there, family members, friends, colleagues, etc., etc. But the next generation of Pakistanis, they do not have any connection or will not have any connection if we don't engage them in somehow. This is the best way to engage Pakistani diaspora, giving them the vote, right to vote.
Absolutely.
So you can raise that point next time when you have appeal to look, you want their remittance, but this generation, Pakistanis are getting young, old, and retiring, but their children are not connected. A second,
Thank
I
you.
would like you to, just a question.
Let me take up this point because We have a few other.
I just have a quick question. One sentence.
I have a question based on what you just said. I want to ask the group this. How do you engage the next generation? Does anyone have any ideas?
Can I answer that?
Yes.
I think there are a lot of young people who went and joined Imran Khan's government from US and England because they became advisors to him. They could not legally be part of the cabinet, but they became advisors. That kind of made them feel that they were taking some part in Pakistan's development or progress. So I think that's one way, if we engage them in that way as advisors.
Another way, again, in a little bit of advertising for the Pakistan Initiative, Uzair and his team working on a project which would take young Pakistani Americans as well as American academics and scholars regularly to Pakistan so that they could do their research and work and build ties with institutions there. So I think this is probably something that could be done. We have the next question over here.
So actually, I have an observation and a question too.
Okay, if you could keep it brief, please.
I'll try to keep it brief.
Because I'd like to get to the others also.
Okay,
Thank
so first of all, as Mr. Khan said, like we are not in the 1901 time frame. We are in the 2020 time frame. It blows my mind even to think of a simple logical thing like, where somebody's human right. It's my God-given right. If I'm a Pakistani, I need to vote. That's it. I don't care where you come from. My money from the country comes to get my money. But I can't give it back. In what capacity? This is simple black and white case, If I was standing in front of a judge here in this country, and I showed him like, I'm a country citizen, man, and I'm trying to vote, and this is not available for me. This is BS, It just blows my mind. Actually, I have my daughter in college. She's from a graduate from Columbia University. She's a political science major. She's doing all of this stuff. She's working for a senator. She's her, so as the gentleman said, that the youth is not engaged. It is very much engaged right now in this panel, So I'm really happy to see that everyone is trying to do their due diligence and making things move in the right direction, Thank you.
Thank you. Can we go second row, please, at the back? Yes.
Yes, assalamu alaikum. Assalamu alaikum, everyone. My question is particularly, Barrister Daud, you mentioned, I was taking notes throughout. My hands are tired now. So what I noticed about the radicalization that you mentioned when you talk about Afia Siddiqui. So as an academician, I have a question mark there. What kind of radicalization do you think that is also actually relates to our younger generation, whether they are over here and over there, educated in a Western style, to connect them with their indigenous culture? That isn't there are two radicalizations taking place in Pakistan? Westernized radicalization, which is based on blind modernity. On the other hand, a very traditional Islamic identity-based radicalization. Thank you.
Thank you.
Daud, if you could hold your reply, can we come to the front row, extreme left? Let's get one more question and then we'll.
Assalamu alaikum.
Walaikum
Assalamu alaikum. Thank you all for putting this forum together. I wanted a couple of things, just a brief comments on my focus in the US. I work with PTI, by the way. I'm biased. I've been working with them for the last 20, 25 years, whatever. We were given the right to vote. I want everybody to kind of make sure they understand that the voting right for an overseas Pakistani has not been taken away. It's still there. We can still go back and vote. What they've taken away is our right for I-voting, so that we are able to vote from living here in the US. One of the things that happened in the, I'd like Barrister to address it if possible. We talked about how there was, 1%, 1.5% voting in the
by-elections?
in the by-elections when we tried I-voting.
Yes.
I think there was some dishonesty on part of the election commission, the way they put it all together. They asked people to come up with two pieces of identification, NICOP or an ID, and a Pakistani passport. So that's why people in the Middle East were able to vote, because they all carry Pakistani passports. We people living here in the US and Europe did not, because we've given up our passports and we rely on our NICOP. So that was one of the reasons for very low voting, and I hope they will address it this time. They won't ask us for two IDs again, whenever it comes back.
Thank you very much. We're coming near the end of our appointed time. I'm going to ask Dawood to give a brief response, and then the others if they want to add anything.
Okay.
Please.
First, can I respond for
Yes.
the obvious question?
Yes.
Actually, my answer was that I was in UK when the early phase of war and terror was going on. Okay, back home in Pakistan, there was somehow a dictatorship by the General Musharraf's era. People the younger students in England, I was very much surprised that even Hizbul Tahrir kind of organization was functioning in England at that time, and even they were in universities. And I have seen very educated Pakistani British who were talking about that toppling the governments in Pakistan, even in the Muslim world, is the only solution. Because this is what they were been experiencing, how the Kaf League was being made up. This is how they were being seen, how the military actually made these political parties, and they have no say in the government. So these kind of organizations were quite a bit in a very strong epic at that time, which I experienced. This is why I was been telling you that we need to channelize those energies which were being disobeyed. Now when I see those younger students and they are in their businesses life now, they've been telling me that they were on the wrong side because they were being emotionalized. And what I saw from the Afias case was the same thing during the Soviet invasion. All these charitable on the name of jihad were being opened here. And this is what that was going on, and this is how they were being emotionally charged up, that the Muslim rulers in the Muslim world have no solution for their betterment, and this is how they've been backed up by those organizations. This is how I saw that thing. And coming on to your questions, I think when we had this mechanism was being made in 12 weeks, like I've said. And secondly, the biggest problem at that time was the system and its security. The problem with Pakistan at that time was that election commission was not really in line with NADRA. What NADRA recommendation was giving to election commission was giving another recommendation to the NADRA. So there was no close connection between them. So the only thing they saw to make the vote safer was one of the things they said, either you can give your, like a Pakistani passport, they have a certain number which is electronically wired. So you cannot, honestly, I don't understand technological things, but what I can saw was that Pakistani passport number could not be hacked. This was the only reason at that time they gave this thing. I don't know much
Thank
about
you.
electronic.
Do you want to add anything quickly?
Yeah, I just want to piggyback on what you said about Afia Siddiqui and radicalization. I totally understood your point of Western radicalization, because to me also, I was a little put off when Afghanistan was conquered by United States troops, and the first picture they saw was, oh, we are modernizing Afghanistan because we have shops with magazines in them, and one of the magazines was a Playboy magazine. So that kind of put us off, so I know where you're coming from. But on the other hand, other type of radicalism where people don't care for their lives. They don't care for their lives as well as other people's life. They go so far as to start being convinced that them giving their life or committing suicide is a beneficial thing for somehow them or other people.
Thank you, Rifat. Sahar,
Sure, I
last
actually just
word.
had a point about engagement. I'd like to end on a positive note. I agree that the youth is very, very much engaged, and I think a part of that reason is because we see a lot more information and courses in universities. I've taught at American University. I teach at the Foreign Service Institute here. And I've seen a lot of engagement now where there's a big push to not just want to engage in Pakistan because you are from Pakistan, but you want to engage in Pakistan because it's an interesting country, because it has a lot to offer politically, economically. Just even if you study democracy and democratic evolution, Pakistan is a really good place or a really good country to study. So you actually, the problem though with doing graduate work in a place like Pakistan was safety. So if you wanted to write a dissertation, for example, on voting, you couldn't do field work in Pakistan because they wouldn't give you money to go and you would be concerned about safety. That is slowly changing, and I think a lot of that is changing because of the diaspora community here. There is so much information now, travel blogs, Instagram, TikTok videos, all of the stuff that engages the youth and looks at and shows Pakistan in a different light, which is beyond security. And there are many other issues that bind Americans and Pakistanis and the Pakistani American community together. Some are, of course, issues of travel, right? Uniting families. There are issues of course, climate change. And all of these issues are kind of coming together. And the youth is very interested. And the youth is interested in traveling and wanting to do research and putting their money where their mouth is, or at least wanting to get more information out there. So I will say that the Pakistani, diaspora is very engaged. I think voting would be one way to get them engaged. I am of the opinion that I'm a little, I guess I'm a little more skeptical of how voting and the youth will necessarily be a good thing or a positive thing. I guess I'm waiting for the data to come out of that. But I think that the youth in general has been a lot more engaged, and that's really our strength. So voting is just but one aspect of that.
Can
Thank
I
you,
add
sir.
one thing on that?
Very quickly.
I would just like to answer this thing. The interesting thing is that, what you've been saying, it's for me, it's like a stage 2. The reason why I can tell you. Pakistan is one of the country where only one prime minister or only one government from the last 75 years has completed their term. We have a highly, unstable political structure.
Yeah.
If we, when I was doing this overseas voting case, I had some from England, they were Indians. And I asked them, why don't you ask for your right to vote? They said, we have a stable country.
Yeah.
We don't have any trouble that what's going to happen after 3 years in our country. So we don't really bother. We want to establish the country where we are. And this is how, so I believe that if you have a smooth, transition of power in Pakistan and the government start completing their terms, I guarantee you these people will focus on other things.
Right.
The reason why they ask for vote is that because they believe that there's no stability. And they've just been glued back home because of that. This is what I believe in that structure.
Thank you all. I'm sorry, we're running out of time. No, sorry. We've already run out of time, and I'll be in trouble with my hosts at the Atlantic Council. I do want to thank the panelists, Daoud and Rifat and Sahar, but I also especially want to thank the audience. You've been a great audience. And I think we did not expect that we would solve all the problems of Pakistan and voting in Pakistan. But the fact that we brought so many good ideas out of this discussion with your comments and questions is the way forward. And I'm glad that Sahar raised the questions about the next generation, because that is a challenge for the current generation of seniors, my generation and others. How do we engage our children with our homeland? Because they grew up here, they were born here, they're working here. How do we get them involved? And so this is really where efforts of groups that are sitting in this hall, as well as the Pakistan Initiative at the Atlantic Council, is trying to build those bridges between the United States and Pakistan. So with that, I want to thank all of you and thank the panel. Please join me in thanking them.